Good evening, listeners. You've tuned in to the Halloween Signal, broadcasting from somewhere deep between the woods of forest. Tonight, I've gathered 5 tales whispered around dying campfires. Stories the wind itself carries through empty streets. The first comes from a village where the dead are never truly silent. They say you can still hear them in the ringing of the bells. There was a time when Grafton Hollow was just another forgotten village tucked between the hills. Small cottages of stone, a mill by the river, and a single crooked church whose steeple scraped the low clouds. You could walk its single muddy road in 5 minutes and still miss it if the fog rolled in. But everyone who lived within sight of that steeple remembered one thing above all else: the bells. They weren't large or grand. Only 3 iron bells, forged in the late 1700s. Their tone deep and sorrowful. The villagers said they had a soul of their own. Every time someone died in Grafton Hollow, the bells rang, not by human hands, but of their own accord. At least, that's how the stories began. When Lydia Farr came back to Grafton after 12 years away, the bells had not rung for a generation. The church stood boarded and abandoned, ivy swallowing the walls. She came carrying her mother's ashes, hoping to bury them beside her father in the hilltop graveyard. It was dusk when she arrived. The road was silent, except for the whisper of her boots on damp leaves. Every window seemed to watch her pass. The innkeeper, a gray woman with hollow cheeks, handed her the room key without a word. When Lydia asked about the church, the woman's hand froze midair. "You don't want to go up there after sundown," she said. "No one does. The bells know who doesn't belong." Lydia smiled politely, the way city folk do when confronted with superstition. But that night, As rain began to fall in gentle sheets, she heard something through her window. 3 low notes drifting from the hill. Slow, heavy, almost like breath. She froze. It wasn't the wind. It was the bells. The next morning, she went to the church. The path was overgrown, the stone steps slick with moss. The iron gate to the graveyard hung open, creaking slightly though the air was still. The church door groaned as she pushed it. Inside smelled of damp earth and decay. Pews lay overturned. Mice had chewed through the hymnals. But up in the tower, behind a narrow wooden staircase, she saw them. 3 bells, black with rust, suspended from rotting beams. She could almost feel the vibration in the air, like they'd been struck recently. She called out, "Is someone here?" No answer. But on the wall beside her, carved deep into the plaster, were words barely legible through age and grime. The bells ring for the unburied. That night, Lydia dreamed she was walking through the village again. Only this time, everyone she passed wore funeral shrouds. They looked at her, but didn't speak. She woke to the tolling sound again. 3 notes, slow and sorrowful. The next morning, she asked the innkeeper who tended the graves. "No one," came the reply. "Hasn't been anyone for years. They all stay down now. Mostly." "What do you mean, mostly?" Lydia asked. The woman just turned away. Lydia climbed the hill again that afternoon with her mother's urn and a small shovel. She found her father's headstone, a simple cross of stone, half sunk into the earth. She dug beside it, her breath visible in the chill. But when she struck something hard beneath the soil, she froze. It wasn't stone. It was wood. A coffin. She brushed away dirt and saw it was fresh, the wood unweathered. Her name, Lydia Farr, carved across the lid. She stumbled backward, shaking. That's when the first bell tolled. The sound rolled through her chest, a vibration so deep she could barely breathe. The second bell followed, lower, mournful, and the third, sharp, metallic, final. The hill trembled. The earth beneath the coffin began to move. She ran, down the slope, through the trees, past the old mill where the river whispered darkly. She didn't stop until she reached the inn, slamming the door behind her. The innkeeper stood there, calm as ever, her hands folded. "I told you not to go," she said. "What is that thing up there? Why my name? Why?" The woman poured her tea, steam rising between them. "The bells don't ring for those who've died, Miss Farr," she said. "They ring for those who will." Lydia barely slept that night. She decided she'd leave before dawn, before the fog set in. But as she gathered her things, she noticed the radio by her bed flickering to life, though it wasn't plugged in. A voice, faint and distant, came through the static. "Lydia Farr of Grafton Hollow," it whispered. "Prepare to lie still." Then, clang, the first bell. She bolted from the inn. The street was empty, but the fog wasn't gray anymore. It was thick and black, swallowing lamplight whole. She followed the road out, heart hammering, but the village twisted around her. The same buildings, the same signposts, repeating endlessly. Grafton Hollow wouldn't let her go. Everywhere she heard them, the bells, each note echoing from a different direction, pulling her back toward the hill. She reached the church again just before dawn. The door was wide open now, the air inside warm and pulsing. The bells swayed, though no ropes pulled them. Beneath them, 3 coffins waited. 1 open, 2 sealed. On the open one, her name. She stepped closer, drawn as if by invisible hands. The inside was lined with black velvet, soft and inviting. And there, lying across the pillow, was her mother's locket, the one she thought she'd left in her suitcase. She turned to run, but standing in the doorway was the innkeeper, her face pale as ash. "It's no use," she said. "Once they ring for you, the hollow takes you back." "I don't belong here," Lydia shouted. "You do now." The woman pointed to the locket. "Blood calls to blood. Your mother's ashes were never hers. They were yours." Lydia's breath caught. She looked down. The urn she'd carried, still clutched in her hands, had cracked. Inside was not ash, but fine gray dust and small bone fragments, shaped like her own hand. The bells rang one last time, and when the villagers woke the next morning, they found the church quiet again, the doors sealed. A new headstone had appeared beside the others on the hill. Lydia Farr, returned to rest. October 31st. The bells haven't rung since. But sometimes, when fog rolls down the valley and the air grows still, the people of Grafton Hollow swear they hear faint music in the wind. 3 soft notes, a warning, a promise. And that, listeners, was the first of tonight's tales. If you're still with me, keep your fire burning low. Shadows travel faster when the flames grow high. Up next, our second story, The Lantern Keeper's Son. You're still awake. Good. The best stories live in the hours when even the ghosts have stopped pretending to sleep. Our next tale drifts in from the marshlands beyond Grafton Hollow, a place the maps forgot long before the living did. It's about a man who kept the light burning, and a boy who learned why it must never go out. The marsh road to Black Fen bends like a dying serpent, narrow, uneven, half swallowed by reeds and mist. There are no milestones, only the leaning posts of old fences, their wire long since eaten by rust. At the end of that road stands the lantern tower, tall, iron, lonely. Its light hasn't gone out in more than 100 years. People say it was built to guide travelers through the fog, back when Black Fen was a trade route. Others say it was never meant for the living at all, because every night when the light burns, the marsh stays quiet. And when it doesn't, the marsh remembers. Elias Mern worked that tower every night. He was a lean man, gray at the temples, before his 30th year, with hands cracked by oil and cold. His wife had died in childbirth a decade before, leaving him with one son, Peter. The boy grew up knowing the rhythm of the lantern, the scrape of the crank, the hiss of the flame, the long echoing toll of the wind in the hollow metal shell. Elias would tell him, as long as the light stays on, nothing in the fen can find its way out. Peter always thought he meant the wolves, but wolves don't whisper. When Peter turned 12, his father began coughing blood. The doctor from Grafton Hollow came once, left twice as fast, and said nothing. That winter was the worst in 20 years. The fog came earlier, thicker. It pressed against the windows like something alive. Still, every night, Elias climbed the tower stairs and lit the lantern. Sometimes Peter followed, carrying the oil can, staring out through the round glass as the flame shimmered across the marsh. And sometimes, if he looked long enough, he saw faces in the fog, pale, half-formed, watching. Once he asked his father about them. They're the ones who wandered too far, Elias said. They wait for the light to fail. One night in late December, Elias didn't wake. Peter found him cold in his chair by the hearth, his eyes open toward the window. The lantern had burned out some time before dawn. The tower stood black against the morning fog, and in that silence, Peter heard something else. A whisper just outside the door, like someone dragging wet cloth along the wood. He froze, listening. The whisper came again, then laughter, soft, high-pitched, wrong. He slammed the bolt shut. The sound stopped. Then 3 faint knocks echoed against the door. When he finally dared to look through the crack, there was no one there. Only a smear of muddy handprints leading toward the marsh. He buried his father that afternoon on the dry ridge behind the tower, marking the grave with a stone and the old lantern key. He should have gone back to the village, but the fog thickened, and the road seemed to vanish after the second bend, so he stayed. He tried to light the lantern again that night, but the flame refused to catch. The oil hissed and smoked, sputtering out. Then, from below, he heard heard the tower door creak open. "Father?" he called. No answer. Just the sound of wet boots climbing the iron stairs. He waited at the top, holding a wrench like a weapon. But when the footsteps reached the final step, they stopped. Nothing appeared. Only the smell of marsh water and rot filled the air. He climbed down slowly, heart pounding, and found the door closed again from the inside. Over the next few days, the fog never lifted. Peter stopped keeping track of time. He thought about leaving, but the marsh hummed at night, like something breathing beneath the water. He dreamed of voices whispering his name. He dreamed of his father, standing in the doorway, dripping mud, eyes glowing faintly gold, like the lantern's flame. "You have to keep it lit," the dream father said, "or they'll walk again." Peter woke screaming. He stumbled to the tower, shaking, and this time when he struck the match, the flame roared to life instantly, bright and steady. The light flared through the fog, slicing the dark like a blade. And for a moment, the marsh fell completely silent. He thought it was over until he heard the scratching. Soft at first, then stronger. The sound came from beneath the floorboards. He pried one loose with his wrench. Underneath was a shallow cavity, filled with blackened oil and something else. Bones. Hundreds of them. Small bones. Child-sized. Every one of them carved with strange symbols. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. The symbols looked like the marks on the old ridgestones, runes to keep the dead bound beneath the earth. And as he stared, the whisper came again. "Peter, keep it lit." Only this time, it wasn't his father's voice. That night, something moved in the marsh. He saw it through the window. Tall, thin shapes drifting between the reeds, glowing faintly in the fog. Dozens of them. The light of the lantern flickered, dimmed. He ran to the crank, turning it desperately. The gears screamed, the chain clattered, the flame flared once more. just as one of the shapes reached the edge of the tower. He saw its face. It was his father, or what was left of him. Skin gray as wet paper, eyes burning like embers. But the mouth wasn't his. It stretched too wide, too sharp. "You let it die," the thing rasped. "Now it's your turn." Peter staggered back, tears burning his eyes. "I didn't mean to. Father, The thing smiled. "You will keep the light for me now." And then it vanished, melting into the fog. By morning, the marsh was silent again. The lantern still burned, steady as ever. Peter didn't remember lighting it. He didn't remember sleeping either. But every time he blinked, he saw flashes, faces in the reeds, mouths open in endless, breathless screams. He began to hear them more clearly now. Not whispers, but pleas. "Turn it off," they begged. "Let us go." He tried once, just to see. The moment he snuffed the flame, the ground trembled. From every corner of the marsh came a single, shrill cry, like steam escaping from hell itself. He relit it instantly, hands shaking, and the cries stopped. Weeks passed, then months. When travelers finally came through that way again, hunters, they said, they found the tower burning bright. They knocked, called, and waited. No one answered. Inside, the room was immaculate, the oil stores untouched, the walls clean. But in the lantern's reflection on the glass, one of the hunters swore he saw a face looking back at him. The face of a boy, eyes empty, turning the crank over and over again. Years later, they built a new road and left Black Fen behind. The tower still stands, though its light flickers only on certain nights. When the fog rolls in thick and yellow, if you pass by and look closely, you might see the faint shape of a boy at the top window, turning a crank that never stops. And if you ever think to climb up and see who he is, don't. Because the moment the lantern goes out, the marsh will start to move. That was the Lantern Keeper's son. Don't worry, listeners. Our next story will take you somewhere a little warmer. A small cottage on the edge of another lonely village, where an old woman keeps her needle busy long after midnight, sewing clothes for a guest who never leaves. Some stories breathe quietly, like old houses waiting for their doors to open. This one is about a woman who sewed her loneliness into every thread until the needle began to stitch something back. On the far edge of Grafton Hollow, beyond the river bridge that no one had crossed in years, stood a cottage half sunken into the earth. It leaned like a tired old woman, its roof sagging under moss, its windows dark even at noon. That was where Agnes Rook lived. The villagers said she had outlived everyone who ever mattered. Her husband, her daughter, even her friends. They said she'd been a seamstress once, before her eyes turned cloudy and her hands began to shake. But every night, without fail, they saw a candle flickering behind her curtains, and the faint rhythm of her sewing machine echoing through the valley. Thunk, 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 until dawn. Some said she was mending clothes for ghosts. When Agnes was young, she'd been the village's best seamstress. People came from miles around for her work. Wedding gowns, funeral shrouds, christening blankets. She'd always said the thread remembered the shape of whoever it touched. Her daughter, Clara, had died when she was 9, drowned in the mill pond one spring evening while chasing a paper boat. They never found the body, only her little wool coat, snagged on a root by the bank. Agnes had kept that coat for 30 years. She could never bring herself to finish mending the tear. One October, the rain came harder than ever. The road to the cottage washed out, and no one saw Agnes for weeks. When the grocer's boy finally went up to deliver food, he found the front door ajar, and the air inside thick with the smell of old cloth and candle wax. Agnes was sitting at her sewing table, her gray hair falling like cobwebs, her eyes glinting pale in the candlelight. On the table before her was a child's dress, unfinished, made of blue silk that shimmered faintly, though the room was dim. The boy asked who it was for. Agnes smiled without showing teeth. "For a guest," she said. "She's coming soon." The boy left and never went back. That night, Agnes dreamed she heard footsteps upstairs. Light, quick ones, like a child's. She woke with her heart hammering, needle still in hand. The house was silent again, save for the faint creak of the rafters. But when she turned back to the sewing table, the blue dress was gone. In its place lay Clara's old wool coat, dry, clean, and whole, as though it had never touched the water. The next morning, the fog hung low across the hills. Agnes brewed tea, set out 2 cups. She didn't know why she did it. It just felt right. When she turned around, one of the cups was empty. She heard laughter then, soft, bright, and distant. The sound she hadn't heard in 30 years. Her throat tightened. "Clara." Silence. Then, thuk, thuk. The sewing machine had begun to move on its own. The wheel turned. The needle clicked. The spool unwinding slowly. Thread wove through the empty air, stitching invisible fabric. Agnes stepped closer, trembling. The needle stopped. When she lifted the presser foot, she found a piece of paper pinned beneath it. A note, written in a child's handwriting. "Finish the dress, Mama. I'm cold." For the next week, the villagers saw the candle burning brighter. Sometimes 2 shadows moved across the curtain instead of 1. Agnes never went into town. She didn't answer the door when the priest came. She worked day and night, humming softly to herself, sewing a dress no one else could see. Sometimes she spoke to it, asking questions, laughing, crying. The fog grew thicker each night, and sometimes, when the wind blew toward the village, people swore they could hear the faint voice of a child singing from the hill. By the last week of October, the candle burned all night long. Agnes had changed. Her skin had gone pale and thin. Her eyes ringed and bruised gray. She barely ate. The air in her cottage had grown damp and heavy, like the bottom of a well. But she was smiling, always smiling. When she finally finished the dress, a thing of blue silk and white lace, it shimmered with every flicker of light, as if it were made from moonlight itself. She placed it on the chair opposite hers and whispered, "There, my love. Now you can come home." Then she went to bed. She dreamed of water, dark, endless, cold. She saw her daughter beneath the surface, hair drifting like seaweed, eyes open, hands reaching up. But the little girl wasn't drowning. She was waiting. "Come down, Mama," she said. "It's warm here now." Agnes reached out and woke to the sound of dripping. The candle had gone out. The air smelled of wet earth and pond water. The chair where the blue dress had been was empty, and across the floor, small muddy footprints led from the doorway to the sewing table. By morning, the fog had crept all the way into the house. It lay thick across the floorboards, curling around her ankles. When she turned, she saw a child standing in the doorway, barefoot, soaked. "Clara," she whispered. The girl smiled, water running down her cheeks like tears. "You finished it." She wore the blue dress now, shining faintly in the gray light. Agnes fell to her knees, sobbing, reaching for her. Her hands passed through the child like mist. Clara tilted her head. "It's time to sew one for you." Before Agnes could speak, the girl stepped forward and pressed her small, wet hand against her mother's chest. Cold spread outward, slow and deep, like a thread being pulled through fabric. "Agnes, sleep, Mama," the girl whispered. "We'll sew together now." When the villagers finally went to check the cottage a week later, they found the windows shattered and the front door open. The sewing machine sat in the middle of the room. On the table lay 2 dresses, one blue, one gray. Both perfectly tailored, both damp to the touch. Agnes Rook was nowhere to be found. But the villagers say that if you pass that cottage on a foggy night, you can see a faint candle burning inside and hear 2 voices humming the same lullaby, the needle clicking gently in rhythm. Thuk, 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 thuk. That was The Stitcher's Guest, a quiet little love story about the things we hold on to and the things that hold us back. Keep your seat by the fire, listeners. The night is only halfway through. Our next tale takes us to the fields, where the harvest never truly ends. This next one comes from the far edge of the valley, where the fields stretch like dry skin over old bones. They say every harvest feeds the living and the dead alike. But in this village, it's hard to tell which is which. The village of Marrowfield was a place of good soil and bad luck. The crops grew tall, the grain golden, but every autumn someone disappeared. The old folks said it had been that way for centuries, since the famine. Each year when the last sheaf was cut, the bells of the chapel would ring, and the villagers would gather for the harvest feast. Bread and cider, laughter and song. But by sunrise, one chair would always be empty, and by the next day, a new scarecrow would stand in the fields. No one talked about it. They didn't have to. Every child grew up knowing that when the moon rose full over the corn, you locked your doors, doused your lamps, and prayed you weren't the chosen one. No one knew how the choosing worked, only that it was never random. And that's what frightened Eleanor Brandt the most. Eleanor was a widow. Her husband, Jacob, had been the last one taken 3 years ago at harvest. They found his boots in the field and his hat nailed to the scarecrow's head. Since then, she'd lived alone on the edge of Marrowfield, tending her small plot, pretending not to hear the whispers when she went into town. Some said she was cursed. Others said she'd made a deal to spare herself. Neither was true. At least, not yet. The harvest moon came early that year, large and swollen, red as an open wound. The air was dry and sharp. The crows didn't sing. On the morning of the feast, Eleanor woke to find ash on her doorstep. A single handprint. Her heart. Everyone knew what that meant. The mark of the field. The one who bore it would not see another dawn. She tried to scrub it away, but the gray stain sank deeper into the wood, as if the house itself had accepted her fate. When the sun dipped behind the hills, the bells began to ring. The villagers filed toward the square, faces pale, hands clasped in silent prayer. The smell of cider and smoke filled the air. Eleanor went too, because not going was worse. The harvest master, a tall man in a black coat with a burlap hood, stood by the pyre at the center of the square. His voice rasped through the cloth as he spoke the old words: one for the seed, one for the soil, one for the sun. 3 times he said it, and 3 times the crowd echoed back. Then he lifted his lantern and pointed toward the crowd, straight at her. Eleanor felt every eye turned. Her hands trembled. Her breath turned shallow. The harvest master nodded once. The soil has chosen. By midnight, she was alone in the field. The villagers had gone home. The feast was over. Only the wind remained, dry, cold, restless. They'd tied her to the post with straw rope, a bundle of corn husks at her feet. Tradition. The harvest master had whispered, "Don't struggle. It's only for one night. When the sun rises, you'll be gone, and we'll have another year." She'd spat in his face. Now she wished she hadn't, because as the moon climbed higher, she began to hear them. The rustle of the corn, the whisper of dry leaves brushing against one another. Too rhythmic, too human. Voices, low, broken, singing some tune she didn't know. And then, from between the stalks, something began to move. Shapes stepped out of the corn. Dozens, thin and bent, their bodies nothing but sticks and cloth, their faces hollow sacks of burlap stitched with black twine. Scarecrows, but they walked like people. Eleanor bit back a scream as they circled her, their movements jerky and slow, like puppets dancing to a song she couldn't hear. The nearest one tilted its head. A dry whisper came from beneath its sackcloth face. "You took what wasn't yours." She shook her head. "I took nothing." The figure's hand shot forward. Cold, straw fingers scraping her cheek. Another spoke. "The field remembers. The field always collects its due." The air thickened. The moonlight dimmed. And then she saw him, Jacob, or what was left of him. His body sagged under a tattered coat, straw spilling from the seams. His face was gone, replaced by the same burlap mask. But she knew him by the way he tilted his head. Gentle, uncertain. "Jacob," she whispered. "It's me." He stepped closer. The cloth over his mouth twitched, and for a moment she thought he might be trying to speak. Instead, he placed his hand against her chest. Ash spread from his fingers, crawling across her skin like frost. Her breath came shallow. Her body began to stiffen. "No, please." Jacob leaned close, and in a voice dry as wind over stone, he said, "The seed must grow." Then the world went dark. When morning came, the villagers found the field untouched. No sign of struggle, no rope, no ashes. Only a new scarecrow stood in the center, wearing a woman's dress and a locket that shimmered faintly in the sun. That season, the crops grew twice as tall. The villagers gave thanks, as they always did. And when winter came, they burned the fields, as tradition demanded, until the harvest master noticed something strange among the ashes. Small footprints leading toward the forest. Months passed. The following spring, children began seeing a woman at dusk near the field's edge. Thin, with gray hair and eyes like smoke. Sometimes she smiled and waved. Sometimes she wept. Once, a boy swore he saw her digging in the soil with her bare hands, whispering, "You can come home now." By morning, the crops there had turned black. The soil smelled of burnt sugar and bone. No one planted near that spot again. But every harvest since, the ash has returned, always on a single doorstep, always in the shape of a hand. And no one knows whether it's the field choosing its next offering, or Eleanor Brandt calling someone home. That was Harvest of Ashes. Sleep tight, my friends. But if your window overlooks a field, don't stare too long into the stalks. Some things look back. One last story remains in tonight's broadcast. The final transmission from the hollow signal. It's a tale from the deep water, a lake that whispers names before it takes them. There are places where the world forgets to echo, where sound goes in and never comes out. Blackmere is one of them. The village of Dunwell sat on the edge of a lake that maps refused to name. A black, motionless stretch of water, so still it reflected nothing. Not the moon, not the trees, not even your own face, if you leaned close enough to touch it. The locals called it Blackmere, and they said it had no bottom. Fishermen who tried to measure it never found the lead weight return. The rope would just keep running, down and down, until it snapped clean off. For generations, the people of Dunwell learned not to ask what lived beneath. They only said the lake was hungry, and like all hunger, it never stayed quiet for long. The trouble began when Dr. Henry Lawton came to town. He was a man of science, not superstition. A hydrologist from the city, sent by the university to study unusual acoustic anomalies in still bodies of water. The villagers warned him. They told him that at night the lake spoke. Soft ripples, carrying voices that weren't echoes, but invitations. He laughed, called it a case of auditory pareidolia. Then he built his cabin right on the northern bank. And for the first few nights, it was quiet, peaceful even, until the fourth night, when the silence began to move. He first noticed it around midnight. The frogs had gone quiet, the crickets too. The forest, normally alive with nocturnal noise, had gone utterly still. And then came the sound, faint at first, like someone humming just under the floorboards. A woman's voice, soft, melancholic. Henry. He froze. No one in town knew his name yet. He stepped outside, flashlight trembling. The lake stretched out before him, smooth as oil. No wind, no moonlight, just black. Then he heard it again. Henry. The voice came from the water, from deep beneath the surface. He told himself it was just the wind carrying some trick of sound. But when he turned to go back inside, he saw it. A faint ripple spreading toward him, slow, deliberate, as if something vast had just shifted below. And beneath the ripple, for just a heartbeat, he saw a pale face staring up from the dark. The next morning, he told the locals what he'd seen. The barkeep, an old woman named May Corbin, just shook her head. "You shouldn't have answered," she said. "Once the lake knows your name, it doesn't forget." He asked what that meant, but she wouldn't say. That night, Henry set up his recording equipment, hydrophones, resonance meters. He was determined to prove there was a natural explanation. An underground vent, maybe, or seismic resonance. At 2:47 a.m., the readings began to spike. The lake was humming again. He checked his instruments. They showed frequencies below human hearing. Subsonic waves rising from the depths. Then, through his headphones, he heard the voice once more, clearer this time. "Henry, it's cold down here." He nearly tore the headset off. His pulse hammered. "Who is this?" he shouted. The voice answered, "You said you'd come back." He stared at the dark lake. "I don't know you." "Then why did you promise? By dawn, the cabin was a wreck. The floor was soaked with lake water, though the door had been locked all night. His recordings, hours of static, all ended with a single moment of silence, followed by a "listen closer." Days passed. Henry stopped sleeping, stopped writing. He began leaving food by the shore, as if feeding something he couldn't name. May Corbin came to check on him once. She found him knee-deep in the lake, talking to the water. "You shouldn't stay," she told him. "Blackmere doesn't drown people, Doctor. It keeps them." He didn't answer. When she returned the next morning, his boots were still by the dock. His coat hung on the post, but the lake was still, too still, and the silence that came with it, that same unnatural hush, began to spread across the valley. Birds fled. Dogs wouldn't bark. Even the church bell stopped ringing. It was as if the sound itself had been taken. 3 weeks later, divers from the city came to search the lake. They never found the body, but one of them, a young man named Rafik, resurfaced. He said he'd seen something below the silt. Not a body, but a row of faces pressed into the mud, eyes open, mouths sealed shut, as if they were screaming in perfect silence. And beneath them, something vast, something breathing. By the end of the month, the village of Dunwell was gone. No fire, no flood, no sign of struggle. Just empty homes and silence. When the university expedition finally arrived, they found the lake larger than before. The old docks were half submerged. The map had changed, and in the center of the water, barely visible beneath the surface, they saw what looked like the roof of a cabin. One of the researchers, a woman named Dr. Lane, leaned over the boat and whispered, "Lawton." The water rippled once. Then, very faintly, a voice answered, "It's cold down here." They say Blackmere still exists, though it isn't on any map, and if you stand on its shore in absolute silence, you can hear your own name carried softly back across the water. No echo, no reflection, just your name. And if you answer, even once, the next time someone listens, they'll hear 2 voices instead of 1. That was the last story of the night. 5 signals, 5 warnings, If you've made it through all of them, congratulations. You're still on this side of the glass. But before you go to sleep, listen close. Make sure the silence in your room isn't moving, and all that remains is silence. Silence.